All right, guys, on today's video, we are going to be doing a video on how I adjust my bandsaw. I picked this up at Northern Tool, but all these bandsaws are pretty much identical between Harbor Freight, the clutch ones, and there's, like I said, there's plenty of them, different branding, all the same functions. And let's go in the garage where I have it set up already, and I'm going to tell you guys the troubles you might endure trying to set this up to cut square, and my tips and tricks of getting it square after so many hours of trying to adjust it. Again, I'm a noob when it comes to this, but this thing took me forever. I felt like I felt like I should just give up on this project, but we got it going. All right, here's the bandsaw. I've used it a few times, did plenty of pie cuts using this tool, and it does a pretty good job. But let me walk you guys through how to set up this machine. A lot of them say it's set up from factory, but as this one, we checked when we got it, it was not set up properly. The guides were way too tight. You couldn't even spin them. The blade also was in a true 90, so we all got that figured out. And just to save you some hassle trying to figure out this machine out, I'm going to give you guys a few steps that you want to use in order to make your productivity much better and what to look out for while using this machine. So let's get started. So right over there, there's a cover. We already took out this black cover, and the guide rollers have a cover on each end, and we removed that for video purposes here, and you can see kind of what's going on. And I suggest you remove the backing plate. Couple screws here, couple screws there, and one screw holding it in the back. Highly suggest removing it. Just obviously be careful while you got the machine running, if you're going to be running it, so you don't cut your balls off. But the first thing you guys want to do is check the tracking when you get it. And by tracking is how this blade is sitting on these pulleys, top and bottom. And you can see right over here, this machine, our top pulley is sitting perfectly flush against the back plate of the pulley, and that's kind of where you want it. The top pulley is adjustable, and we'll talk about some of these adjustments here to adjust the angle of the pulley. It can be straight, it can tilt this way, or you can tilt the pulley this way by adjusting some of these screws. We'll go over that. The bottom pulley is a stationary pulley. You can't adjust it, and clearly you can see it is not fully touching the back plate, but it is close enough. And don't expect perfection, because you're not gonna get it. You can see that blade sticking out a little bit, whereas on the top, that blade, you can see it's just minimally sticking out, just enough so the teeth don't bend. The teeth obviously are not straight, they're pointed internally and externally from midline, so you can't really get the teeth on there or you'll destroy the blade. But tracking, from now on, we're talking about the alignment from the two pulleys as tracking. That's the first thing you want to set up, is your tracking. Now, when I got this machine, this blade was pretty much halfway off of the pulley. That itself will cause misalignment of the guide, especially the back guide that's rolling on the back of the blade. The tracking location here will affect the guide location. Everything has a cause and effect when you're dealing with this machine, and if you guys are setting it up, you will see that yourself. Every little thing will affect your cut. So that's why these machines, it takes a while to set up properly, and I feel like it takes a long time to set up if you're inexperienced. And when you change the blade, you might have to do a lot of the alignments again, just going off of my personal experience, because when I loosen it, it does affect some changes here. But that's beyond the point. Let's get to the next step. I'm going to tell you how to adjust the tracking. I'm going to turn it on for you guys here, and we're just going to watch it go. That's another problem with mine, and that's why I'm returning it. You see, that's pretty good tracking. Get it as close as you can without touching. As you can see, the bearings are all working. All right, so we're gonna adjust the tracking right over here of this pulley. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna loosen up the middle bolt first. Lefty loosey here, loosen it up. Now we're also gonna loosen up the top. This is the tension, this locks the tension knob in place. So we're just gonna loosen that up just a little bit. My original one broke already, just so you know. And yeah, there it goes. That most likely won't happen to you. But as you can see with this loosened, you can see how you can adjust this pulley. And by adjusting the bottom bolt, if you're taking it out counterclockwise, you see it's gonna tilt that blade outward from the top. You can see it right there. You can see all that play in that pulley. And if you turn the bottom bolt clockwise, it's gonna push that pulley from the bottom going upwards. So again, that's gonna adjust your tracking. So this and this in combination will adjust your tracking. And I'm gonna put this back on. We'll give it a spin and I'm gonna show you what a bad tracking looks like. While I'm here, I just removed the pulley just so you guys see the function of everything. This is the pulley. All this comes mounted together. And you can see on this end what's going on here, and I'm gonna demonstrate the function. So the top nut is connected to this, which is connected to this. So if you tension the blade, all it's doing is moving the whole assembly higher. See that? The whole thing is moving up. And now we're gonna bring it down. As you put your whole pulley in here, the bottom bolt, which is again is gonna adjust the tracking angle of the pulley. You see how that functions. By going clockwise, it's pushing out that pulley, whereas going counterclockwise changes the direction and the angle of the pulley. So those are your adjustments. Let's put it back in here and get a baseline. Once you get the blade on there, make sure it's nice and flat against the back plate. Adjust your tension to wherever you feel like it's the right amount of tension. Hand tight is probably your best bet. Once you get that tension correct, you want to tighten down that middle bolt. See the angle, you just want to leave whatever the angle is. Tighten down the middle bolt, and then you can tighten out the top one as well, just to keep that locked position on the tension. So we're gonna call that good right there. Don't over tighten these because they probably will strip. I'm gonna start it up right now and we're gonna see which way the blade decides to deflect. If it's gonna start going forward, and we probably got to change that angle of the bottom bolt. So let's see. All right, so I got it turned over and it doesn't look that bad, but it's still a little bit further away than I would like it. So what we can do is we can adjust that angle of the pulley a little bit more. So first I'm gonna loosen the middle one just a little bit, one turn. And I'm gonna adjust it counterclockwise, and you'll see the blade move back out. There you go. As you can see, we did counterclockwise, the pulley changed and it deflected off. So you want to make small changes while you're doing that, but clockwise will bring that blade in towards that lip of the pulley, and that's where you want it, towards the lip. Okay, so that's tracking, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, tracking, you want to get the top pulley adjusted, and again, only the top, to keep that blade against the back pulley edge. Once you have it adjusted to where you're comfortable with the tension and you're comfortable how it's sitting on the pulley, once you're happy with that adjustment, tighten the middle bolt up slightly, just tighten this one, and you can tighten the top bolt. Again, the top bolt's going to keep the tension in place, and don't over tighten them. Tracking, boys. At this point, we're finished with tracking. We can go on to the next step, which is these guide bearings and the adjustment on that. Now, step 2, you want to adjust the guide bearing tension. These bearings are adjustable from the back end on both sides. Right there, way too loose. You see the blade is actually not even straight because there's so much space between the bearings. So you want to get these bearings a little tighter, but not too tight. That way your blade is straight and it's efficient. If it's too tight, it might cause deflection in the blade, and if it's too loose, again, it's going to be too loose and your cuts won't be straight. I'm going to show you how to adjust that right now. So both bolts, the front one and the back one, work the same. It's a camshaft bolt. So take your 12 mil, and then to undo it, let's go counterclockwise. Once we loosen this up, I'm going to show you how that works. So as I'm turning it, you can see the difference in how that bearing works. Both of them work the same way. So ideally what you want to do is get this blade on the center of the rear guide. If it is off to one side, if this blade is off to one side, I want you to adjust both bearings first to get that blade in the middle of the back guide. So I'm gonna go ahead, tighten it down. I'm gonna do the same thing on both ends. So that looks pretty straight. The blade is pretty straight. At this point, see, I can't even turn these rollers with my fingers. The blade is nice and tight in there, but if you can't rotate these things like I can't right now, way too tight, let's loosen them up just a little bit. There you go. See, now that one's spinning quite freely with your hand. That's just about that tension that you want. This one's still a little tight, so we'll loosen it up a little bit. There you go. Perfect. This is the tension that you want. Slight drag on it, but not too tight. When you're happy with it, we're gonna lock up the back bolts. One thing to note is the back guide bearing. Like I mentioned earlier, the tracking and where the blade sits on this pulley will affect whether the blade is touching that guide bearing or it's in front of the guide bearing, like so, and there's space. So that tracking is gonna affect it. So once you get the tracking dialed in, we're gonna come and adjust these guide bearings. So again, the side ones spin freely, looks great. The back one also spins freely, so that's perfect. You just want it to touch like a hair, but you don't want it to be too tight on it. If I press against the blade right now, I could barely spin that bearing. So that looks like a good setup, but what if it was too tight? How do you adjust it? Well, I'm going to show you that right now. All right, now if you want to adjust the top bearing, what you're going to need is a 14. And we're going to adjust this bolt right over here. This bolt can go, once you loosen it, you can adjust this whole bracket up, down, side to side, and pretty much freestyle it. This is the most critical part of the blade cutting square and straight. And there's two of them, one on each side, as you can see. So these are the most vital components here and the final step in setting up your saw. So we're gonna turn it to the left to open it up. All right, now you can see it wiggling, and at the same time you see that blade adjusting itself, and that's gonna affect how straight and true it cuts your material. The first thing you want to do here is adjust the height. See, if I go up, there's pretty much going to be no space on the blade. Now that we already got the blade in its true tracking position, you want to adjust that. You see, I'm adjusting it just so it touches. See, we went from here and we're going to go down. You don't want to press it too far down so it's pushing the blade forward either, because now you're just creating a bend in the whole saw and the blade. But from the neutral position, just bring it down just a hair, just so it's touching, just like that, just kissing. And at this point, you're fine. So now the most critical part here is, once you got that adjustment done on both ends and it's just kissing the blade with the top guide, is to determine how true this setup is. So we're gonna loosen this side as well. And this is gonna give you a good representation of how many different adjustments you can make and how true or not true the blade will be cutting. So if one side is off and one side is true, look at that cut. It's gonna look like garbage. Same thing with the other side. If you angle both of them in, it will miter cut your pipe or your stock, your square tubing. Same thing if you do both of them on this end, it's gonna be like running a miter. So let's try to figure out how to set these adjustments up so you get your square cut. That's gonna be the final step in setting up your 4.5 by 6 inch metal bandsaw. Coming around back, obviously you got your miter gauge. First, you want to put it on 0. You want to make sure your back fence, your plate, is square. So then we can have 2 squares and we can make sure it's cutting perfectly straight. There we go. All right, we're gonna select our angle. That right there is at 0. We're gonna lock it up. All right, now that we got this all squared up, we have a couple of different instruments. We got a speed square, we have a block, and we got a ruler. That's pretty much all you're gonna need to set this up. And the first thing you want to do is we're gonna set our speed square right here to check our 90-degree angle. Maybe just a small alignment towards the back of the pulley should get it all adjusted perfectly to be square. You see, if it's not a true square, you will have spacing. Right there is your true square. Let's tighten it down. So now that we know we're square here, we got to make sure we're square top to bottom. How do we do that? This was the hard part for me, guys. This was the hard part. I'm gonna take my square, place it right over here. Let's bring this in. All right, so we're gonna bring that square right there. We're gonna lock it into place. And right now I could tell you, you can kind of see where that blade is going. If we put our ruler next to it, look at that angle. Look at that angle. We gotta get that blade so it's pretty much parallel with the speed square. How are we gonna do that? Well, we have to adjust these guides. You see how it's changing that guide angle affects how that blade is tensioned. So I'm just gonna eyeball it right over here. For example, that looks pretty good. I'm gonna bring that in a little bit too and tighten that down. All right, so we're just gonna bring that speed square a little bit more forward. And don't slam it against the blade like this, because then you're not gonna have accurate results. Just kiss it lightly, tighten it down. And as you can see, that looks pretty good already. That's pretty close. I think we may have to turn, it this way just a little bit to get the bottom of the blade a little bit closer. And one thing you can do to test this is just lift this whole blade up and see how it looks like if it's touching any part of the speed square. So that looks pretty good. It's not touching the speed square at the top or the bottom, obviously. Sometimes if it touches more on the bottom or more on top, that tells you that the blade is not true and square. So that itself right over there is a pretty good base angle. You see we're just a hair off. You see the blade is coming outward a little bit. I'm gonna adjust it and get back to you guys here. All right, finished my adjustment. You can see where we are with the blade. Nice and straight, just about perfect. Nice and true up against the square. That's what you want to see. So I'm happy with that. Again, this is the most crucial part of it cutting square, and I want you guys to make a few cuts and see how true everything is. Thing I also want to mention, if you don't have a speed square, you can use a block, something that's flat, relatively flat. You can vise it down in here, and same concept, you can use that to check for how square you are, and that's pretty square. Just make sure, since the blades on the bottom stick out side to side, make sure maybe you're above the lines where the blades are, so you're not touching the blade and it's bumping you out of proportion. The last thing you can potentially do, which I did, is take a ruler and just measure from this square corner, you know, from this square cut, just measure the distance from the left side all the way to the right side. And if you're gonna see that one side is way off compared to the other side, you know you have to adjust either one guide or the second guide. So that got me pretty square. You can try all these 3 techniques, whatever works better for you. Hell, you can do all 3 of them just to get the best alignment here with the bandsaw. So I've made some cuts with the bandsaw, and with a square you want to make sure if you're square. I'm going to show you guys that right now. One thing I want you to do is mark the top of your cut where the saw's hitting first. Put a line on it. You can see I put a little marker on the top, and that way I will know if it's square top to bottom, and then I can also check my square side to side. So since this is where the top was and the bottom, I'm checking that for squareness first. That's pretty square. Towards the back end, you can see there's a little bit more space on the back end, but that is pretty good. Right there, you see a little bit more light coming from the bottom. So that's the top to bottom. To check your square side to side, you don't check the top to bottom cut, you check your side to side cut, right? So my side to side is pretty much near perfect. That's a perfect square. And the same thing goes with your pipe. If you got a pipe, mark the top of your pipe. When you cut it, check the top to bottom squareness first. If there's a gap, you will know that the guides need adjusting. If you cut your pipe and this is your side to side, check this angle. If this is a square, see this has a little bit of play in it. So my 90 on my fence was not adjusted correctly. So that's how you determine where your machine is off. Top to bottom cut and squareness, and then side to side cut and squareness. If it's off on one end, you kind of have a good idea of what to adjust. And I've been doing a lot of cuts. I'm going to overlay all the pie cuts I've done on this machine. All right, we did all our cuts. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pie cuts. And the machine does work, but again, don't expect it to be a perfect cut. And the most important thing is I was cutting and then I was checking for flatness just to see how true and square it cuts. And don't expect the laser cut, but it is pretty dang close. So you will be able to weld the remainder of the gap up. So that's the video, guys. It's getting dark out here, but I hope you enjoyed that video. If you guys do have any comments or questions or suggestions, you guys can post it on the bottom. And I'm making this video because I was watching a lot of videos trying to set up this bandsaw, and I swear this is my first like bigger machine purchase, and I spent hours messing with it, and I had no real guidance, and like I felt like I didn't know what I was doing, or I was repeating steps 10 times without really knowing what I'm doing. So hope you guys go back to this video as a reference, and I hope it helps you. If it does help you set up your bandsaw, drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and yeah, thanks for watching.
I ain't here for the money, I ain't here for the fame. Though it might be nice to own a jet plane, I'ma do it all for you. Come along and see